All right, so get ready, because we're diving headfirst into the world of emotions. Like what's actually happening in our brains when we feel things. Your research is fascinating, by the way.
Well, thanks. It's a really exciting field, and we're learning more all the time. It's amazing how much we're challenging what we thought we knew about emotions.
For sure. Speaking of challenging what we thought we knew, can we talk about that whole emotions as little characters in our heads thing? It's like the movie Inside Out, but is that really how it works?
It's a fun image, right? And a
Yeah.
common one, for sure. But the reality is a bit more complicated than those little emotion guys controlling us.
So no little anger gremlins running around up there.
Not exactly. I mean, think about it. If emotions were just these simple, hardwired things, wouldn't we all react the same way to stuff?
True. Like we all know someone who's terrified of spiders and someone else who'd happily hold a tarantula.
Exactly. Emotions are way more flexible than just automatic reflexes. They're shaped by so many things. Our genes, our upbringings, past experiences, even our culture, all of that comes together.
So it's not like pulling your hand away from a hot stove, which, by the way, I've done way too many
You
times.
and me both. But yeah, a reflex is instant, but emotions, they're influenced by so much. The context, what we're thinking, how we see a situation.
Okay, so no little emotion puppets, no simple reflexes.
Yeah.
What is happening when we feel fear or joy or even just like contentment?
Well, think of emotions as more than just feelings. It's a whole body experience. They involve our brains, our bodies, and how we behave. It's all
So
connected.
it's like not GST in my head, it's my whole system getting in on the action.
Exactly. Think about a time you were really excited, maybe about a big game or something. You probably felt it everywhere, right?
Mhm.
Your heart, your energy
Well,
level.
totally. And on the flip side, if I'm stressed, my stomach lets me know it, like immediately.
Exactly. And that's your body and brain working together. They're coordinating those responses to get you ready for action.
Which makes me think about that fight or flight response we hear about. But, I mean, we don't always punch a wall when we're angry.
You've hit a crucial point. That's emotional regulation. We might have automatic responses, but we can learn to control our reactions too. We can choose a different path, and that's a really important thing to remember.
So we do have some control over how we experience and express our emotions.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more interesting. Because we all experience and regulate emotions in our own unique ways, there are so many individual differences.
That makes me wonder how much of this is pre-wired versus learned. Like, are we born with some emotional tendencies, or
Yeah.
does our environment play a bigger role? I have so many questions. But before we get ahead of ourselves, how do scientists even begin to study something as complex as emotions in the brain? I mean, how do you measure a feeling?
Well, it's a tough one. It's not like we can just stick someone in a scanner and see fear flashing in neon lights.
Right, like how do you capture something so internal, so personal?
Exactly. But we've got some tricks up our sleeves. One way is to look at outward behavior, stuff we can observe.
Like facial expressions, smiling means you're happy, frowning means you're not, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those little muscle movements can tell us a lot, but of course, it's not always that straightforward.
True. I've definitely plastered on a smile when I've been freaking out on the inside.
Happens to the best of us. That's why we also use things like heart rate, blood pressure, even how much someone's sweating. It's about how revved up their nervous system is at that moment.
So like those lie detector tests, your body betrays you, even if your face doesn't.
Kind of. Though a racing heart could just mean you've had too much coffee, right? So we use other tools too, like asking people directly about their experiences.
Good old-fashioned questionnaires.
Yep. We have some really detailed ones that help us understand how people perceive and label their own emotions.
It makes you wonder though, right? If we don't have the words for an emotion, if we're not even consciously aware of it, is it even really there in the same way?
Now that's getting deep, that whole nature of consciousness thing. But luckily, we can also look directly at the brain.
Brain imaging. That's what I wanted to hear more about.
Mhm.
fMRI. Seeing those brain regions light up, that feels like the ultimate way to understand emotions, doesn't it?
It's definitely revolutionized the field, but like any tool, it has its limits. We have to be careful about how we interpret the data.
Okay, so what should we keep in mind? What are the caveats when we're looking at those brain scans?
Well, one thing is timing. Emotions can change so quickly, but fMRI takes a few seconds to capture what's happening. It's like trying to understand a movie by looking at a picture every few minutes.
You'd miss a lot of the action.
Exactly. We might miss those subtle shifts in brain activity that happen in a split second. And then there's the question of how realistic these lab settings are.
Because lying in a giant metal tube staring at pictures isn't exactly how we experience emotions in everyday life.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much those brain patterns, those emotional responses, might change out in the real world interacting with actual people and situations.
Right. It's like, does the brain react the same way to a picture of a bear as it does to, an actual bear chasing you through the woods? Probably not.
Probably not. So while fMRI is powerful, we've got to be cautious. We can't jump to conclusions. Just because a brain area lights up, it doesn't mean it's the cause of that emotion.
Correlation, not causation. That's
Yeah,
something we always have to keep in mind.
for sure. And that's why we use a whole range of tools and techniques to get a complete picture.
So we've talked about observing behavior, measuring those physiological responses, even peeking into the brain with fMRI. But how do we actually go from data to understanding? Feels like we need some kind of framework, right? Some theories to help us make sense of it all. It does feel like we need some theories, right? Like some models to help us connect all these dots.
Absolutely. Data without interpretation can be pretty meaningless. And luckily, there are a bunch of different theories about how emotions work.
Okay, well, hit me with your best theory. What's got you most intrigued?
One that's really interesting is the interceptive theory of emotion. It basically says our feelings aren't just in our heads, they're deeply connected to what's happening in our bodies.
Okay, so you're saying it's not just that my heart races because I'm afraid, but that my brain might actually use that feeling of a racing heart to help create the feeling of fear.
Exactly. It's like our brains are always listening to our bodies, our heart rate, our breathing, even those gut feelings, and using that information to figure out what we're feeling.
That makes sense. Sometimes I get that feeling like a knot in my stomach, and I know something's wrong even before I can explain why.
Right. Our bodies can be surprisingly intuitive. And this theory suggests those physical sensations aren't just side effects, they're actually helping to shape our emotions.
So it's like our emotions are dot embodied, like not just mental, but physical too.
Exactly. Now, another set of theories focuses on appraisal. That's about how we interpret and make sense of the world around us.
So it's not just what happens, but it's also how we think about it.
You got it. Like, imagine you're walking down a dark street at night, you hear footsteps, your heart might start racing, right? But whether you feel fear, annoyance, even curiosity, depends on how you judge the situation.
Oh, totally. Is it just someone walking home, or is it like a horror movie waiting to happen? Our
Yeah.
brains are always trying to figure that out.
And those appraisals, those interpretations, they directly influence our emotional responses. Now, if you're ready to go even deeper, we can talk about constructed emotion theories. These really challenge some of our basic ideas about emotions.
Oh, lay it on me. I'm ready.
Okay, so these theories suggest emotions aren't these fixed categories, hardwired in the brain. They're more like fluid, dynamic states that our brains create based on a whole bunch of factors.
So no little fear button in there.
Not exactly. It's way more complex than that. We're talking about sensory information, past experiences, social and cultural influences. It all gets thrown into the mix.
So our culture shapes our emotions too.
Absolutely. Think about how differently people express anger, sadness, even joy in different cultures. What's normal in one place might be totally taboo somewhere else.
It's like those studies on facial expressions. Right? Some seem universal, but others are definitely culturally specific. Fascinating.
It really is. And it just goes to show emotions are way more nuanced than we often realize.
I know. It's like we've been thinking about them in 2 dimensions, and suddenly we're seeing the whole picture in 3D.
That's a great way to put it. We're just starting to unravel these mysteries, and it makes you realize emotions are powerful, but they're not something to be afraid of. They make us who we are.
That's a great point to end on. I feel like I need to go for a walk and process all of this amazing information.
I know the feeling. It's a lot to take in, but hopefully it gives you a new appreciation for the complexity and wonder of human emotions.
It definitely does. Thanks for taking us on that incredible journey.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.